So today we're gonna talk first about the flow of energy in an ecosystem. So the flow of energy, all that means is we have, let's say, it's just how energy moves through an ecosystem. So let's say there's a species, let's say it's just grass, some type of grass, and then there's a grazer that feeds on the grass. Then there's a predator that feeds on the grazer. So in this super simplified ecosystem, which of course nothing in reality ever is, you can clearly see the energy moving from the grass on to the grazer, and then the grazer gets eaten by the predator, so the energy gets transferred to the predator. Now, in these simplified terms, you can separate these into layers by energy. So these are called trophic layers. So each one of these is in their own trophic layer. But at the same time, this transfer of energy is very inefficient. So in general, there's something called a 10% rule, which all that means is 10% of energy gets passed on to the next level. So, and energy is measured in calories. Now, a calories is enough energy to heat one 1 gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. Now, you might think of calories as, well, that's the amount of calories in your food, but that's actually a different unit. That's a food calorie. Sometimes they're called kcal, so kilocalories, and that's just 1,000 of these calories. And the reason why, when you eat something super simple that still has 100 calories, the whole reason why you're not heating up a gram of water to like super high temperatures is, well, because inefficiencies. And that's one of the reasons for the 10% rule. It's because only 10% of energy gets passed on, because everything else is, well, quote unquote, lost as heat. It's not really lost. Heat is important for living beings like us. But in terms of passing on the energy, you can think of it as lost. So let's say the grass receives 1 million calories. Now, because we can apply the 10% rule, we can say that the grazers will probably receive somewhere in the range of 100,000 calories, and the predators will receive 10% of that. Now, 10% of that would be 10,000 calories. And this is one of the reasons why there's always very high ratio of something in a lower trophic level, like grazer, to something in a high trophic level, like this predator, because there's just so much more energy available to the lower level. So it's just going to be able to sustain far more individuals. And you can also, these diagrams of the flow of energy can also be drawn like this. So let's just mark species as letters. So let's say species A is the producer, so that's where energy enters the ecosystem. And let's say it's eaten by B and C. And we will say that both B and C are eaten by D, but that a certain species E will eat C as well as D. And of course, I'm not drawing the decomposer. That would be a lot of arrows and quite confusing. But something like this really demonstrates that trophic levels can really become confusing, because sometimes there's not always a uniformity on how energy goes on. So you can see energy here from A goes on to B, and it goes on to D, and then E. Well, now you can also say that energy can go from A to C to E. Now, this this really messes things up, right? Because now energy can go through different amounts of individuals before reaching the highest predator. So that really goes to show you how exceptions can occur. And now, along with energy, there's also nutrient cycles. So what a nutrient cycle is, normally we talk about four things. So nitrogen, carbon, hydrogen and oxygen in the form of water, and phosphorus are the essential elements to life. And nutrient cycles are just how living things get access to these elements and are able to use them. So let's start with nitrogen. Nitrogen and it is really common. It's a gas. It's N2, and it's 78%. It makes up 78% of the atmosphere. So you might be thinking that it's really easy to get, but it's actually not the case, and that has to do with nitrogen's chemical bonding. It's nitrogen is triple bonded, which makes it super energy taxing to break apart. So the only things that can really break apart this nitrogen are a specific species of bacteria. Now, let's say we have these bacteria. They they are in a relationship with certain plants called legumes, and we can talk later about what these relationships are called. And basically, in exchange for the bacteria providing nitrogen, which comes in the form of nitrates, nitrites, and ammonia, the legumes provide basically shelter. Now, what matters here in the nitrogen cycle is that the nitrogen can get passed on to other living things, and this can be done the same way as energy because other organisms can eat the legumes. But also because these nitrogen compounds are water soluble, which means that these compounds will dissolve in water, and that allows them to be passed on to other plants. So next we have carbon. So carbon is the backbone of life. All known life is based upon carbon, and how most organisms, well, all organisms that we know of get carbon is they get it from the air, so in the form of carbon dioxide. So there is a really important equation. You might have heard of it, but it's in a process called photosynthesis. And basically, it just combines carbon dioxide and water, and it forms glucose, which is a sugar that is a simple sugar that stores energy for plants and animals, and oxygen. And this does something. It converts an abiotic substance into a biotic substance. Now, what that really means is abiotic just means dead. Actually, no, that's not accurate. It means never alive. Never alive, hasn't been alive, never will be alive. And biotic just means dead, so formerly alive or currently alive. And of course, you also have the reverse of photosynthesis, which is cellular respiration. And every organism does it. You right now watching this video, you're doing it uncountable times in each and every one of your cells because that's how we get our energy. And cellular respiration is just the reverse of photosynthesis. So glucose plus oxygen, sorry, and it turns into carbon dioxide, water, and energy. And it's also important to remember here that all of photosynthesis is powered by the sun. So remember to have that in your equation. And we're on to water. So water is a really complicated cycle because it changes states a lot. So typically you'd start with, say, water in lakes or oceans. So let's say this is a lake, and you have the sun. Okay. Forgive my terrible drawings, but anyways, the water will evaporate because of the heat, evaporation, and that just means the water is changing from a liquid to a gas. Now it's in the form of water vapor, and then, well, there wouldn't really be anything. But then eventually, since it's high in the atmosphere, it's in cold air, it's going to condense. And when it condenses, it's going to form clouds. So let's move the clouds over. And eventually, rain droplets will form because the condensed water tends to build upon particulates in the air, and eventually they grow into droplets large enough that uh, they begin to fall due to gravity. So you have precipitation, which can be in the form of rain or snow. Now, some of this water that precipitates, some of it will, let's say this is the ground, a surface. Some of it's going to immediately run and it's going to go back into these bodies of water. But other amounts of water, they will infiltrate the ground. So infiltration and runoff. And the water that infiltrates will enter underground bodies of water, so aquifers and such. And sometimes they stay there for a very long time. Perhaps they re-enter these bodies of water, but also they can eventually be tapped by plants. So let's say we have water down here, and eventually a plant's roots reach them and taps it for water. Now, plants have to, well, obviously they have to move water and also other things in them. And to do this, they use something called evapotranspiration. And what that means is there's water in a plant's leaves, and as the sun heats it up, the water begins to evaporate. And water is very cohesive. What that means is water likes to stay next to water. It pulls other water, it attracts to itself. So water down here is also going to get attracted, and that results in more water getting pulled up. And this is a process called evapotranspiration. And this is another one of the ways that water can go through the cycle. And lastly, we have the phosphorus cycle. Phosphorus is really easy. There's rocks that contain phosphorus, so phosphorus. And, well, when these rocks get eroded by water, the water carries some of the phosphorus along with it because phosphorus is water soluble, and eventually it's going to get to in living things, so plants and animals perhaps, and that's just how it comes into the system. And what's really important to know about all of these cycles is that they take hundreds, if not thousands, of years to complete a cycle. So, say a raindrop, not a raindrop, a drop of water, let's say it's in this body, it might take decades upon decades for it to evaporate and then rain and then infiltrate and then start the cycle all over again. So these are really long time frames, at least for us humans. And then finally, as I promised prior, we wanted to talk about the type of interaction between bacteria and legumes. So this is what's called symbiosis. And all that means is it's a long-term relationship between individuals of different species. And there's three types. You have mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. Mutualism is just a relationship in which both parties, so both living things, benefit. Commensalism means one individual is benefited. And one isn't really affected. And parasitism means one is benefited to the detriment of the other. And so when we're talking about parasitism, we're not talking about predation. We're normally talking about either feeding off the host, so the parasite, which is the one that's benefited, feeding off the hosts in smaller ways, so like not outright killing the host normally, just like maybe taking out small bites or tapping into the host nutrients. And that is all for right now.